they got
Mhm.
into a disagreement and it was loud. Trump dissed one of the other Republican senators, said they were a bad person, which, that's not very nice.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Do we want to talk about Trump at the Senate Republican luncheon?
Yeah, Trump blow up behind closed doors. That's how NBC characterized it. There are a lot of little phrases that they or the news uses, like behind closed doors or caught on camera. They love that one, like caught on camera. Yeah, that's why I can see it. Of course, it's caught on camera, but they say that he blew up behind closed doors. First off, we need houses. But what exactly was the blow up behind closed doors?
Okay, so there's two different things going on here. Trump declined to sign the housing bill that was passed. And then he went to a luncheon with the senators to talk about the Iran War Powers Resolution, but also just to talk with them, right? Occasionally this happens where a president goes and chats with the House and the Senate, and they talk with their caucus about what are we going to do? What are our priorities? And in this case, what happened was that the Senate had just passed the War Powers Resolution trying to end the Iran War. And Trump asked the Senate pretty much, why did you do this? What was the point? And Senator Cassidy, the senator who didn't win his primary bid to be reelected, essentially said, is this a real question? Are you asking us why we actually voted against this? And Trump essentially said, yep, why did it happen? And Cassidy gave him an answer. And the answer was, we don't have enough information, the war's gone on way too long, haven't met our objectives, that kind of thing. And then essentially my understanding, I'm saying my understanding of what happened based off of Cassidy's interview to the media, because he recounted it, is essentially that Cassidy kept going and Trump started interrupting him as he was talking. And so they just kept matching their volumes louder and louder. And it became a whole thing, right? Where they got
Mhm.
into a disagreement and it was loud. And effectively, what happened is Cassidy was shushed by his fellow senators. It was like, sit down, stop doing this. But the other thing that happened, my understanding is that Trump dissed one of the other Republican senators, said they were a bad person, Murkowski from Alaska, which, that's not very nice. I don't know, cordial,
No.
chastise. Okay, so to getting into a shouting match with one senator, not great. But then to denigrate another senator, also not great. And so that was the thing, is that they had this sort of shouting match behind closed doors, which just shows fractures in the system, right? That there's some disagreement. And this is actually an ongoing saga. So there's a handful of senators in the Republican side right now that are being called the YOLO caucus, the YOLO group, the You Only Live Once group, because they suddenly found a backbone now that they're not up for reelection or they're resigning from the Senate. So Tillis, Cassidy, there's a few others where they're just very outspoken now in terms of their criticism of Trump, in terms of Iran, in terms of this thing with the housing bill, but also just that the message is bad, that we need to be focusing on affordability. It's just like an ongoing litany of things because they're going out the door. They found the courage to speak up now because they don't have any more.
Yeah.
They're not running for reelection. This is there's lame duck presidents. This is the lame duck senators. They finally found their voice, right? And they're using what little power they still have to try and actually make a difference, be heard. And so that's the point here, is that there's a whole bunch of different things that are happening at the same time. Trump wants the SAVE Act passed. It's very strict requirements that you need a passport or a birth certificate. That is your name that you had at birth. And lest we forget, some women, when they get married, change their legal name to the
Mhm.
last name of their spouse, right? And so that would immediately, boom, disenfranchise millions of people. They wouldn't be able to vote. And that sucks. And that's not good. But there's other issues too. So the reason he was even mentioning Murkowski is because Murkowski gave a whole speech on the Senate that in order for her constituents to get a passport or a birth certificate, they'd have to buy a plane ticket, which costs hundreds of dollars because 20% of Alaska doesn't have road access. There's no way to get on a road, right? So you'd have to quite seriously pay for an expensive plane ticket to fly to one of the limited locations in the state of Alaska you'd have to go to get a passport. Because for a passport, you have to do an in-person interview, or to get
Yep.
your birth certificate, certified copy. It's not just like a birth certificate. No, you have to get your certified. It's a whole thing, right? The SAVE Act is not going to pass if the filibuster isn't defeated in the Senate, because there's a whole bunch of issues with it as a piece of legislation that it just makes it a political loser. It's terrible, right? Because look, these Republican senators need these voters too to vote for them. And if you
And Trump wants the SAVE Act passed, and the Senate hasn't. And did that have to do with this kerfuffle?
Yeah, so the reason Trump declined to sign the housing bill is that he wants the SAVE Act passed in the Senate. That was the stated reason. It's a silly idea anyways, because the bill is going to be passed within 10 days automatically unless Trump vetoes it, right? There's a law that essentially it goes like this. The president doesn't have to sign it. It will automatically pass if the House and Senate pass a piece of legislation within 10 days. So all this does is theater. It's 10 days of theater. All it does is say for 10 days, he's not going to sign it, and then he has a choice to make. The choice goes like this: veto or sign it, or don't sign it. Even if he doesn't sign it, still law, right? And the reason the veto is not going to work is it was passed with veto-proof majorities in both the House and the Senate. It's like 85 senators voted for it, and 300 something House members voted for it. So it's not controversial legislation. It's huge bipartisan legislation. And so this is just a big loser. It's a big political loser. In a time when affordability is the predominant message, the president is saying that disenfranchising millions of voters is more important than making it cheaper for them to get houses. It's a terrible message. It just looks awful. It's the same issue that's occurring right now with all these beautification projects, the ballroom and the reflecting pool and the arch and all that other stuff. Why are you forking over millions of dollars to build monuments and to do all these pet projects? Well, people can't afford food, can't afford healthcare, they can't afford a house, can't afford transportation. The Iran war has dramatically increased the price of gas and the price of food. And we've talked about why. Gas because of the Strait of Hormuz, food because of the fertilizer through the Strait of Hormuz. Like, it's baked into the cake right now. The planting season has passed. The cost of fertilizer was so much higher than it has been in the past that the price of food is going to be higher in November. Whenever this food gets to market, the fruits, the vegetables, whatever was planted, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be more expensive for three reasons. It's going to be more expensive because of the gas to get all the resources and inputs to plant the food. It's going to be more expensive because of the price of fertilizer to grow the food. It's going to be more expensive and down the line for the price to get the food to market. Okay? All of those are expensive, higher because of gas prices and fertilizer prices. There is no scenario where those particular prices go down right now. It's not going to happen because it's already happened. Like, the price increases already happened, especially for the fertilizer. There is no way around it. So all the Republicans can do right now from a political perspective to improve their chances of winning in November is to do big flashy things like pass this housing bill that says we're going to make the price of housing lower, or to do the thing like stopping the war in Iran so that you can at least reopen the Strait of Hormuz and say, look, we're driving the price of gas down. We're doing something as opposed to nothing. And the nothing is the real political loser right now. All the Republicans have to do to lose in November is nothing, right? Nothing. All the Democrats have to do to win in November is anything better than the Republicans, because this is a Republican created disaster. No question. Trump started the war on his own, and now he's trying to end the war, but it's super complicated and it's a mess because Iran attacked the cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz and the US attacked Iran. Like, if you look at the news right now, it's a whole mess. It's a whole mess. They signed that memorandum of understanding, but it's already being broken. It's a mess. It's not great politically right now for the Republicans in terms of winning in November. If you look at the polls, the searches for affordability, the number of people saying that affordability is their number one issue, way, way higher than it was even a year ago. Not good, right? So anything that helps to address affordability looks great. Anything that serves for even a moment to visibly deny addressing affordability, not good. And this is an ongoing saga, right? That there's two things that happened. One was the FISA surveillance renewal that Trump essentially stopped that from going forward as leverage. And also the DNI thing we talked about, where he put in an acting DNI who had like virtually no intelligence experience. And then he he nominated someone to be the new DNI, a guy named Clayton, and then at the very last second canceled the hearing to approve him. So the Senate and Trump right now are having a bit of a disagreement. Like there's visible disagreements going on because here's the deal with what was happening with the DNI. Clayton, the process from being nominated to being approved was going to be the fastest nomination ever in the history of the Senate. The Senate all got together and were like, we're going to do this. We do not want this acting DNI guy anywhere near the intelligence apparatus of this country because he's got zero experience. It puts us all in danger to have somebody so flagrantly inexperienced in a position of real power because the DNI is supposed to be the one putting the puzzle pieces together to keep us safe. And to put the puzzle pieces together, you have to understand the puzzle, right? You have to actually know what the pieces are and know what's going on. This guy doesn't. His resume is not there. The other guy at least did. He was a U.S. attorney. He at least interacted with the intelligence apparatus and had more than zero experience. And Trump canceled the hearing at the last second for more leverage for the SAVE Act. This is the whole thing. They've got an ongoing disagreement. Mike Johnson came out in a speech to the House and said that he's the protection program for the House and the administration, that if the Democrats win, the Democrats are going to do what I've said they're going to do in the past, is that they're going to investigate everyone and everything that looks even like the slightest whiff of corruption in every committee. They're going to use the subpoena power to just drag in everybody in the administration, just subpoena them and just ask them relentlessly, what are you doing? What is this? Why is this happening? For example, in the reflecting pool debacle, why was it a no bid contract? The reason you have a bid contracting system for the U.S. federal government is one, it's the free market, but two is so that you drive down costs for the American taxpayer. Why was this project costing millions of dollars more than something of a comparable scale and project size would cost in the private, if you were just to hire a contractor to retrofit a pool? What is going on? Why is it so flagrantly more expensive? This is the taxpayer dollar, right? This is the party of trying to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. It seems pretty wasteful to have a contract that's way higher than what it should cost in terms of labor and materials. That just seems like flagrantly way above the cost, right? And why was it a no bid contract? These are the questions, right? And so Johnson came out and gave this speech, and I liked AOC's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's response was like, if you don't want to be prosecuted for crime, don't do crime, right? These are people in a position of public trust, right?
Yeah.
Who are publicly admitting that they think there's something there to be investigated if they don't maintain their hold on power. What does that tell you as the American voter? Who's the party that you want to vote for if you want to actually address waste, fraud, abuse? One party is saying, vote for us or we're going to be investigated for all of our crimes. Okay. The other party is saying, vote for us and we'll investigate all the crimes. Seems a pretty simple mental calculation right there.
Yeah, vote for us and you'll get a 1974 level of hearings.
Yeah, the Truman Commission, right? Like,
it'll make great TV.
Sure, but no. So how does Truman become vice president and then eventually president? Truman Commission at very low cost. They brought in all these defense contractors and various corporations. Said, why are you charging us an arm and a leg for these various things in the middle of a war, right? Why are you charging us so much money? What is going on? And he hounded them, right? He brought them in one after the other and got a whole bunch of money for the U.S. government back for the taxpayer. It raised his profile. It got him in position to be the vice president nominee, and then he became president, right? That's how it goes. Well,
give him hell, Harry. That's what they said.
Sure. But here's what I'll say Trump is actually doing one thing that he can do within his power. He has an agenda, obviously, and he has political things he wants to accomplish. This is within his power, right? It's at his discretion when to sign, if to sign, and that he is, look, I may not agree with it, but I understand why he's doing it. It's because it is leverage, it is theater. He's effectively using the bully pulpit to draw attention to the SAVE Act and draw attention away from anything else, to take up all the oxygen in the room and to bring the conversation back to the SAVE Act in the media. Does that mean it's going to work? Probably not, right? The Senate has an eye on the future, and they are not going to give up I don't see it happening. They are not going to give up the filibuster because that affects their ability in the future to get reelected if the tides change and the power goes back into the hands of the Democrats. The filibuster is the only tool really available to senators in the minority party to have any kind of influence over legislation because they can threaten the filibuster and they can slow things down. That is their power. If you take that power away, then it makes the Senate much less of an influence overall in the U.S. Congress, right? It puts more power in the hands of the House. And so that's why I think senators aren't going to give it up. They don't want to, right? They are a co-equal, separate branch of government. This is within their power to decide and only their power to decide. And I don't think their hearts are in it for the SAVE Act. I honestly believe that the smart experts that they bring along, because look, the Senate's a little different than the president. They'll actually talk to experts, right? They'll actually go to people with doctorates in political science and statistics and the people who know the actual numbers. They'll go to the Government Accountability Office. They'll go to the Library of Congress. They'll go to the Congressional Research Service. Because remember, the Library of Congress is the largest research library in the world. And the Congressional Research Service is there just for Congress. So if anybody in Congress wants an answer, they go to the Congressional Research Service, which is paid for by Congress, and they say, give me an answer to this question. I want the actual facts. And my guess is that for some of these senators, they did that on the SAVE Act. They said, how many voters will actually be disenfranchised? How many of those voters who are disenfranchised are Republican voters? Oh, that looks really bad. I don't want to do this because I want to get reelected as a senator. And I want future senators to also be elected who are Republican. This is really bad. This will make voters bear a level of resentment that we haven't seen ever in the entire history of the United States Democratic Republic, because it is essentially putting huge burdens on the voter just to get registered to vote. And it's tantamount to a poll tax, right? That if you want to vote, but you have to pay $700 to vote, some people are going to say, I could use that $700 to buy food or pay rent or,
or buy 700 pounds of fireworks.
Probably costs more than that. Or pay for gas for my car, right? But essentially, this would put such a huge guardrail. I'm pretty sure that's the point, right? That Trump, he wants to decrease the amount of poor people who are voting in elections. How do you decrease the amount of poor people voting in elections? You put huge roadblocks in front of their way and make it very prohibitively expensive, right? If it costs more money than some people will make in a week, because remember, poor people under a certain income threshold, they spend 100% of their money or more. Like they borrow money to live. So when you're operating on razor thin margins in terms of living paycheck to paycheck, $50, $100, $200, $500, that may be a rounding error for rich people, but for poor people, that's their whole food budget. That's their whole rent. That's their whole gas budget for the entire month, right? That's childcare. And so when push comes to shove, people will decide voting's important, but surviving's more important to me. I'm not going to vote. Now, some countries, you know how they get around that? They make voting mandatory. They make election day a holiday, a paid federal holiday, and they virtually remove all barriers to getting registered to vote. So instead of paying to get a passport or paying to renew a license or paying to get your birth certificate or your whatever, they will subsidize people getting those things to ensure that they can vote. Look, it's very cynical. I think that's why the senators don't want to vote for the SAVE Act, is that it looks super bad. It makes them look, and we've talked about the issue of how the demographics are not in the favor of the Republicans right now, right? That their voter base is older, it leans older, and it's the Fox viewing public of the world, and they're aging out, right? They're getting old, and the younger demographics just do not like what the Republican Party is selling. Some do, not most of them. Most of them, there's two camps right now for the younger voters. A considerable number don't vote at all. That's a third or 40%. There's some huge percent that just don't vote at all. And then there's the groups that just do not agree with the Republican platform at all. They don't agree with it for abortion. They don't agree with it for transgender issues. They don't agree with it for healthcare. They don't agree with it for AI and removing labor rights. There's like the environment. Like there's a whole list of things that the Republicans pull really badly with the younger demographic. Now, what makes young people who already have difficulty getting an entry level job or a job that pays a living wage, what really gets them motivated to show up for primaries or general elections? What do you think really gets them to go, this sucks, and I'm going to vote for someone who makes this suck less? Yeah, money, right? They are a group uniquely affected by changes to the wages. They're uniquely affected by prices of gas increases and food because you're severely limiting their ability to enjoy life if they can't go out to eat for a date. They can't go to movies. They can't drive in a car anywhere. They can't ride the bus because bus fare became more expensive because of the gas prices. They can't ride a train because train fare became more expensive because of gas prices. They can't go on a plane because Spirit Airlines had to declare bankruptcy. Who is most affected in a very cerebral way is the young people because they're the ones who go to concerts. They're the ones who go to sports games. They're the ones that go to water parks and theme parks, and they go on vacations for spring break. And if suddenly it costs twice as much as it did last year to go and do anything, who's responsible? The current crop of people in power, the Republicans. They did it. They made it more expensive by not keeping Trump in check with this Iran war nonsense and not effectively passing legislation to make things more affordable because they're not flexing their power as the Senate to say, no, we're going to do this. We're going to pass legislation, and not just the Senate, the House too. We're going to pass legislation to make people's lives better. But also, there's a whole other issue, and that's Doge. Do you remember Doge? All the people who were fired, all the experts who were fired, all the employees, the thousands and thousands of employees who were told, go away, we don't want you anymore. Those chickens are coming home to roost. You know the problem with screwworm? Screwworm is a flesh-eating parasite that eats the flesh of cows. You know what affects the price of beef? Flesh-eating parasites that eat the flesh of cows, right? You know the issue with Ebola right now? Ebola, they just had a case of Ebola in France. Okay, I seem to remember there was a global worldwide pandemic of this disease called COVID that shut everything down. It made life really miserable for a lot of people. They couldn't go anywhere. They had to social distance. They had to wear masks. The economy went down into the gutter. The price of everything went all haywire. People lost their jobs. It was really bad. You know how you stop a pandemic like COVID? You keep the people in place, the doctors, and the experts, and all those people through something like, I don't know, USAID to stop the spread of infectious disease, right? And in the case of something like Ebola, which has a name, viral hemorrhagic fever, you know what viral hemorrhagic fever means? It means that
Ebola.
Yeah, Ebola, but it means that people who get it, some of them, they bleed from everywhere and then die. Okay? The hemorrhagic part of that is the bleed from everywhere and then die part. Okay? And so it would behoove the countries that have the power and the resources and the ability to actually do something about this to invest heavily in making sure it doesn't spread from where it started. In past Ebola epidemics, or whatever you want to call it, in past spreads of Ebola, they've contained it. They've stopped it, right? Did it take a long time? Yes. But they stopped it. Contact tracing, experts, treatment centers in the place. I was listening to an interview with Samantha Powers, the former head of USAID, and she was breaking down how USAID understood fundamentally their role in trying to spread the spread of infectious disease. And so they invested heavily in laboratory testing equipment, in hiring experts and doctors and scientists in all these places to make sure that they had adequate ability to understand the spread of the disease. When Doge goes in and fires like all of those people, and when they shut down USAID, they also fired all those experts, all that infrastructure, all that lab testing equipment. Trying to play catch up now isn't going to cut it, right? You can throw as much money you want at something. If the people who were trained for years and years, who had their abilities honed and their experience really tested in these extreme environments, that they understood the issues involved and how to deal with the logistics of it, right? It was a very fascinating interview with Bloomberg. She was talking about the logistics in particular, about transportation to some of these areas. You have to really figure it out. If you lose all of that institutional knowledge, it's a huge loss. It's not something we can just recover. And that's what I am very frustrated with the Trump administration. And it's very disappointing is that they don't seem to see the value in investing in things ahead of time. So you save money down the way. So the most prominent recent example I can think of is that the US government spent hundreds of millions of dollars building state-of-the-art technology in the bottom of the ocean to track ocean currents, ocean temperature, differences in the speed of the ocean, various things that affect the ocean so we can understand earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, but the big stuff that costs a lot of money. It costs 360 million or whatever to put it in. The Trump administration wanted to take all of those things out of the ocean and then scuttle them, scrap them, destroy them. All this.
Take them out of the ocean so you can put them back in the ocean.
No, not put them back in the ocean.
Well, that's what scuttle means.
No, scuttle means destroy, scrap, to liquidate, to demolish, right? To melt it all down into scrap metal. So the Trump administration, after the U.S. government already spent $360 million on this multi-year, massive scientific research endeavor that Congress passed because they understood the value of like understanding it. Look, this is what boggles my mind. The United States is like the forefront leader of scientific technology for its military, yet somehow it doesn't want to know what's going on with the ocean when we've got the largest navy on the planet. What? They wanted to take all of these things out of the ocean at huge expense and then destroy them at huge expense. And so if at any point in the future the United States government wanted to do this again, I don't know, if the Democrats win majorities in the House and the Senate in November and they're like, that was stupid, let's put it all back, it's going to cost us another $360 million to do that. Thankfully, at the last second, that was stopped, so it's not happening. But the very fact that they even thought to do it was like, what are you people doing? Why are you destroying stuff we've spent years investing in? I've said it before, I'll say it again. Billionaires not going to save us. They're not going to put $360 million worth of research technology at the bottom of the ocean and then share that information publicly, right? They're not going to share weather data publicly. Maybe that's the idea, right? That this is a big gift to private weather people to rake in money, right? That if they're the only ones that have the ability to give data to the marketplace, they can put a price tag on that, right? Because the information from the ocean monitoring devices was publicly available information, right? That they collate the information, they do the research, they release it to everybody for science, for knowledge. If you don't have that public release, you get the private release, and the private release has a value to it. So that could be it. But it's flagrantly corrupt, right? If that's the reason, that significantly diminishes the public good.
Cool. I'm also interested in what the housing bill actually did.
Okay, I can list. It's actually pretty short.
Yeah.
So what it does is it caps the amount that private investors can own single housing homes, so residential neighborhoods, to 350. So they can't own more than 350 houses, single family homes. It removed environmental review hurdles and bureaucracy for environmental things to get certified to build a house. So it just removes the bureaucratic process a bit so that you could build a house faster. And then one of the other things was that it removed a requirement for a chassis for manufactured homes. So there was this requirement in place for a manufactured home that can move, that was costing $10,000 just from the outset just to have it. And they removed that requirement. It's not that comprehensive of a Oh, and they did one other thing for banking to remove certain restrictions so that they can loan more money for affordable housing. But
Okay.
it's not that much. It seems like a lot, but its impact will be big, but it's not that much. But it did affect the market, right? That some of the projects that were happening aren't going to happen now because of the certain restrictions that are put in place. But the idea
Okay.
is to reduce the cost of housing because we've talked about this that private investment firms were snatching up just huge numbers of houses, and it's a monopsony, right? So if you control the supply enough, the egregious thing to do would be to buy up a huge number of houses and then not rent houses that are zoned for renting, so you drive up the value of the home like gold, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
buy it
Mm-hmm.
at a certain price. You don't have tenants occupy it because once tenants occupy something, they have rights, and it requires evictions to kick them out. You just keep it empty, and then you wait a year, 2 years, 5 years, and then you sell it for twice as much or a third as much because its value went up, right? That's where you get these issues of like huge empty apartments in the middle of major metropolitan cities or low occupancy rates. It's like, why? Why would they do that? It's because they're gambling. They're buying a commodity like gold, and it's the value of the property. It's not the actual like thing that it's zoned for to do. They don't care. They make more money keeping it empty and then selling it. Period. The calculus changed after COVID because of you remember they put a moratorium on evictions? Look, people have a right in this country for what they do with their private property. They're not actually required to rent out to people if they don't want to. You can own an apartment for your own. Look, they could claim, "Oh, I live there in 350 different apartments a week a
Huh.
year or whatever," right? They could in theory they could do it, right? They could say, "I this is my 350th vacation home." They could.
Too much.
They could if they're a major corporation. If you're a corporation with $22 trillion in assets, right? In theory, you could hire 100,000 people and say, as part of our benefits program, we have people paying for hotels or for Airbnb, instead we give out a week at a time vacations to employees as a part of our compensation program. What's to prevent them from actually doing that? Or what's to prevent them from buying up all these houses and saying, our employees live there, in quotes, and then the moment they want to sell, it's like, I guess they don't. They moved out immediately. We asked them to move out and they did. Like, this is where it gets super complicated. And I understand why they put a cap of 350 on these corporations, is that I don't know if you've noticed. It turns out that occasionally corporations will come up with very creative ways to make more money than they otherwise could make. They'll claim that their entire business happens on some island in the middle of the Caribbean, or their headquarters are in some European country that gives them a massive tax shelter, or they'll come up with creative ways in terms of their compensation schemes where the CEO will be paid $1 but gets all of his money or her money in stock, right? And in deferred stock compensations that they then never cash in. They take out loans against the value of their own stock, and so they never actually pay taxes on it until they die, in like an estate sale or something. Like there's all sorts of creative ways that rich people keep their wealth, make more money, right? And the problem when you're talking about housing is that housing serves a public good. That people who work and live in places and go to school places need somewhere to actually live. Because it turns out our country has a prejudice against homeless people. You may not have noticed, maybe you did. I certainly noticed. The Supreme Court had a ruling that said that people can be criminalized for sleeping on benches, on sidewalks, in parks, right? So effectively, it's criminal to be homeless in this country. And the Trump administration passed a memo or an executive order that says they want to institutionalize the homeless. They want to forcibly put homeless people in mental asylums and
Mm-hmm.
hospitals. What defines if a person's homeless? If you're living on a couch with family, are you homeless? If you're not paying rent, are you homeless? If you're a dependent, are you homeless? If you're living in your car, are you homeless? And how far will that really go? Are they going to forcibly round up all the homeless and put them in concentration camps? What's the limit? And so that's where this issue of housing affordability suddenly becomes like an existential thing for some of these politicians, because effectively, for the Democratic politicians in particular, like a considerable number of their voting base is very poor. They're low income. They vote Democrat because the Democrats at least try to lift the minimum wage and try to put in labor protections and try to improve their lives. The Republicans are a lost cause on this. They don't care. Like they've made it very clear. They hate the poor. Okay? Not ambiguous. The trying to get rid of Medicaid, Medicare, trying to get rid of Social Security, these are all programs that help the very poor. And so it's not like the Republicans are suddenly advertising to the world, oh yeah, we love helping poor people. No, they hate welfare programs. They hate them. And they try very hard to get tax cuts for the rich and to remove any type of benefit or for poor people, or to make it really difficult for people to access the benefits they're entitled to by imposing very extreme, we've talked about this, work requirements or reporting requirements or volunteer requirements. Like they're trying to put barriers in place to prevent people from getting help. And there is a reason for it. I know the reason is that if you remove all the safety nets, people become so desperate that they're willing to work at whatever pay employers will pay, that they'll do any job to survive. If people are desperate enough, part of the reason you put in a minimum wage was that people were willing to work for very little. And it became a race to the bottom of employers exploiting workers as much as they could. Upton Sinclair jungle stuff, right? Of like little kids working in factories 18-hour days, just trying to put bread on the table, right? And we as a society have decided maybe massive amounts of misery doesn't work. So let's try to reduce the amounts of misery by having a 40-hour work week, overtime pay, labor protections, holiday pay, healthcare. You can't be discriminated against through civil rights in hiring because of your age, your gender, your race, your religion, right? And all of those things are things that the Trump administration has been actively trying to dismantle. They tried to make it so federal workers couldn't have unions. They tried very hard to, with this anti-DEI stuff, and the way they went after colleges in particular, to heavily affect their admission rates, their hiring practices, their curriculum. If you look at what's going on, microcosm and the Defense Department with Hegseth not promoting certain races and genders, like it's all part of this ongoing movement to make it more difficult for minorities and the poor and those who don't have a voice in government as much to suffer even more, right? Because if people suffer, then they're more motivated to work harder, right? You treat workers as incredibly miserable as they can possibly get, and then they'll work because they have to, not necessarily because they want to, but because they have to. And look, other countries do this way better because they have more robust union representation and labor protections. You get 3 weeks of paid vacation in Europe, and they got robust labor protections. If a company wants to fire somebody, they have to go through a whole process. They have to defend why they're firing them, and they have to say what precisely went wrong, and they have to defend it to a board that then approves the firing or not. And it's a whole thing. In the United States, if an employer in many states wants to fire someone, they can just do it, right? I didn't like the smell of their perfume. I didn't like what they were wearing. I didn't like that they showed up a minute late. Whatever the reason, in a lot of states, it's a right to work thing. Boom, fired, right? No more job. And the only barrier in many cases is unions, is that you have a labor contract that says there has to be at least a process to fire someone. And it has to be for cause, that you have to go through an actual process. So one of the things the Trump administration tried is they're trying to get rid of civil service protections for federal government employees. If you get rid of civil service protections, you're going to have a lot of people quit, because the whole point of working in government is that you get job security. You accept the trade-off of lower pay and the possibility of a reduced career ladder or career path for job security. That you work in the DMV, or you work at Social Security, or you work in some like bureaucratic office job that may not have much room for advancement, because you know that you're not going to be fired without cause. And that's why Doge was so egregious, that they just fired huge numbers of people with the reduction in force. And then why the ongoing effort to get rid of civil service protections and unions for federal workers is such a big deal. And that's actually one of those other conflicts that isn't on the radar as much with this disagreement Trump's having with the Senate, is that the Senate is actually on the side of the workers. That they are very aggressively saying, in the House too, but the Senate in particular is saying, no, you will not remove union protections for federal workers. Period. End of story. And there's a reason for that. The largest union in the country is the AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal, Federal Employees. It's the union that protects all the government workers all around the country, because it's not just the federal government, right? It's also state, city, town, county. They all have unionized labor and pensions and job protections. And so this is their voting base for a lot of them. A lot of these senators, because they're statewide offices, a not inconsiderable amount of voters are members of these unions. And it looks really bad for them not to fiercely advocate for people in unions who get paid higher than minimum wage jobs with good health care and pensions. These jobs aren't bad. They're not that people pursue them because they're stable jobs with clear pay scales, and that they're actually more legally accountable to things like civil rights protections because of the government, and the government has to hold itself to a higher standard than private industry. Look, this isn't stated so obviously, but the reason there's a lot of people that actively pursue jobs in the military is because the military has had a clear promotion structure that was based on merit. It removed a lot of the ability of employers to not promote someone or to not hire someone, because the US military has very clear, unambiguous standards for admission that if you meet the requirements, the physical requirements, the tests, whatever, to join the military, they'll hire you, right? They're not going to be like, oh, you're too young, or oh, you're too old, you're too whatever, you got a certain religion or background or race or gender or whatever that employers use to arbitrarily decide not to hire someone. No, the US military, if you meet the requirements, will hire you. The end. Same for a lot of the federal government jobs. That's why the Postal Service has a huge number. If you look at the history of the Postal Service, why they have a huge number of African American applicants in particular, is that the Postal Service was one of the only jobs that paid well, had a career stability and longevity, and that would hire virtually anybody that met the requirements. They had very secure, robust job protections. And so that's why I think it's very disappointing and sad, the state of where we are as a country, that some of the poorest people in the country voted in Trump for a second term when Trump is actively trying to make their lives worse, when he's actively making life more expensive for them, when he's actively making it more difficult for them to get a job, when he's actively making it more difficult for them to get help when they lose a job or don't have a job, and when he's actively making it worse in terms of the environment, right? By advocating for things like coal and going away from things like solar and wind and all that other stuff, that it's literally making it more expensive to breathe the air, drink the water, eat the food. But anyways, I could go on and on this particular topic.
Yeah. We'll see you next week here on Mondays with Mike.